Hey everybody, and welcome to the next edition of the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog. Today we're going to be discussing skilled performance and motor learning and how it applies to youth soccer players learning the different soccer skills and soccer techniques that they need in order to play the game. So if you've been involved in soccer in this country in the last few decades, then what I'm about to describe to you will probably sound pretty familiar. Picture a youth soccer team training session. Doesn't matter the age, gender, or level of ability. But the kids are on the field trying to train and learn a particular skill. It could be dribbling, could be passing, could be shooting, could be controlling or heading, or any other soccer skill. And the exercises that the coach has set up in order to learn this skill are where the skill and the technique is trained in isolation. If it's dribbling, it might be every kid with a ball, dribbling the ball and practicing dribbling skills in isolation. If it's passing, it might be small groups or lines of players passing the ball amongst each other, or possibly even passing the ball in little combinations with each other. But the key concept for this method of training is that the skills or the techniques that the coach wants to train are all trained in isolation, not as part of a group of skills or part of a game. So there's been a lot of excellent research done on skilled performance and motor learning, and even some specific research applying that topic to skill acquisition and learning of motor skills and techniques in soccer. Some really good research has been done by Mark Williams of Liverpool John Moores University in England. And the key finding of this research was that the type of training I just described, whereby soccer techniques and soccer skills are trained in isolation and not as part of a game, is actually not a very effective way to get players to learn how to execute those skills in the game of soccer. So the reason that this method of isolated skill training is not the best way to get soccer players to learn how to execute skills in a game is because of a universal principle of training which can also be applied to soccer training, and that principle is the principle of specificity. The principle of specificity states that the end outcome or result of training is going to be very specific to the type of training that is done. What this means when we apply it to learning soccer skills is that if you train skills in isolation, meaning at slower speeds, without any space restrictions and without any pressure coming from opponents, then players, even if they may learn to execute the skills better in the particular drill, may not necessarily learn how to execute the skills in a game situation when there are constraints on space, time, and movement speed. So if we apply the principle of specificity to soccer training designed to improve players' technique, then what we need to do is to try to come up with exercises that train soccer techniques in a way that is as specific to the game of soccer as possible. And the best way to do that is to come up with training that involves small-sided games designed to bring out the technique or soccer skill that you want to bring out in the particular training session. Here are just a few examples. If a coach wants to improve players' ability to dribble, and specifically to beat other players in 1-versus-1 dribbling situations, then a very simple and effective small-sided game to work on this technique is 1-versus-1. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of different variations of 1-versus-1 that can be done, but if we go back to the principle of specificity and how it applies to motor learning, if a coach wants a player to become better at dribbling and beating another player 1v1, then the best way to do that is to have players play 1v1 rather than to have them practice the dribbling moves in isolation. A second example might be a coach who wants players to become better at shooting. Again, going back to motor learning and the principle of specificity, perhaps a small-sided game where the field is not very long and big goals are used, possibly something like 3-versus-3 or 4-versus-4, and because big goals are used in this game, players will be in a position where they have an opportunity to shoot on goal almost every single time they receive the ball. This type of game would produce a lot of opportunities to shoot and thus a lot of shots on target for the players, and it would force them to execute shooting technique in a way which is as specific to the game of soccer as possible. And thus it would lead to better motor learning and skill acquisition of shooting technique rather than just having players practice the technique in isolation. This is not to say that isolated soccer technique training and individual technique training doesn't have its place. It does. But I don't think that it needs to be done by coaches with their players in training sessions. When coaches have their team in a training session, they should try to make their training as specific as possible, following the principle of specificity. Figure out what technique they want to develop in their particular session and come up with a small-sided game that will help to bring out that particular technique. In this way, coaches will be able to maximize the specificity of their training and thus maximize the skill acquisition and motor learning for their players. Thank you all for watching this edition of the Soccer Fitness Goals video blog. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, if you'd like more information, you can visit www.soccerfitness.ca or www.soccerfitnessgoals.com.